About 6 years ago, I was at a photography conference talking to my friend Booray, and the conversation was going really well and we were having a great time, and I said, dude, we should totally start a podcast together. And he said, of course, absolutely not. And so it took me about 6 months of convincing to get him to agree to do it with me until he finally said yes. But there was one problem. He lives in Tampa and I live in Orlando, and that's about a 2-hour drive each way. And we actually did that for a while. For the first couple of years of the podcast, we took turns driving every couple of weeks and banking a few episodes, and that got really inconvenient after a while. So we decided to go remote. And a lot of trial and error later, we've come to a place where we really are happy with how the audio sounds. So the first thing I want to do is give you some of the options that you have when recording a podcast remotely. And then I'm going to go into the specific things that we do to make sure that our remote podcast doesn't sound like a remote podcast. Why would you want to do that? Because the number one reason why people stop listening to a podcast when listening to it for the first time is bad audio. So improving the quality of your audio can only help out your project. So if that sounds good to you, like this video so more people see it, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so that you can find out about more videos that I'm going to put out, because I am going to do a deeper dive into gear and into the actual process of improving the audio through editing. So let's get started.
If you'll come this way, we'll show you the altar of bad decisions. And there's just like, yeah, there's...
Okay, first things first. Most podcasts recorded remotely are centered around some kind of video chatting software. And that's because if you're hosting a podcast with someone else or you're interviewing someone, you're going to need a way to talk to them in real time while you record. So that's the basis that we're going to grow off on all the things we're going to talk about next. So the easiest way out of the 3 ways that you have to turn that call into a podcast is just to record the call. Now, there are plenty of options and ways to do this. QuickTime can record your screen. Skype call recorder exists. There's tons of options. Now, that's great if you're getting started, but it's gonna sound compressed and buggy, and there's gonna be stops and starts because you're just recording a web call. And so if you want to do a little better for your audio, you're going to want to move on from that option. That's a good way to start, but when you're ready to level up, you got to move on to something else to make it sound better. So your next option is going to be a webcasting kind of a service like Zencastr. And so what they enable you to do is to have multiple people going to the same link and then recording a multi-input podcast. Now, these can be very, very cool, and Zencastr in particular is really good, but it's a freemium service. So there is a free version, but it's kind of hamstrung and doesn't have all the features. And the main features that I'm worried about are, is the audio super compressed? Is it still going to sound like a video call? And 2, am I going to have a file that I'm going to be able to edit later on to make the podcast a little tighter and a little more polished? And so in order to get those options, you're going to have to pay the extra $20 a month for a premium service. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot of money, but if you're like me, I know that $10, $15, and $20 a month subscriptions to things are eating my bank account alive. So unless you're really serious about podcasting and maybe you get sponsorship and monetize it, you might want to try it another way. And this is the way that Booray and I elect to do it, which is to record our audio individually and put it together later in the editing program. Now, it may sound a little bit intimidating, but it's pretty easy, and I'm going to show you how we do it. So here are the basics of the process. Instead of recording the Skype call and just extracting the audio, we record our audio individually. He records on his computer and I record on mine. This is important because if you record a web-based service or through a video call, you're going to get really compressed audio, which means it's not going to have as much latitude editing later on. So you'll have a lot more room to play with a larger uncompressed audio file. Booray uses Audacity, which is free to record directly to his computer, and I use Adobe Audition, which I end up using to edit the podcast together later. But there are many, many free softwares that you can use, or inexpensive ones. Sound Studio for Mac, GarageBand, which is free and comes with your computer, Audacity for PC. So make sure that you are recording to each individual computer, and then we're just going to line them up later, and then it's going to sound like you're in the same room together.
Well, you got to have that. That's, to me, that's priority 1.
So what about lining them up in the editing? Well, it's shockingly easy. The thing that's going to tie everything together is if you get those individual audio tracks lined up, and it'll sound pretty convincing. The easiest way to do it is to just have a countdown. I use the stopwatch app on my phone and count down from 10. Booray listens in to my countdown over the video call, and he counts down along with me. Now, since we're both recording the countdown, when he sends me his audio file, all I do is line up the waveforms of the countdown, and we're ready to go.
3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Photobomb Podcast. My name is Booray Perry, and joining me as always is Gary Hughes.
Now I want to talk to you a little bit about the editing, because you can do a lot to really improve your podcast. There are some problems when talking over a video chat, like, for example, the microphones cut in and out depending on who's talking and things like that. But if you've each recorded your separate audio tracks, you don't have those problems. More than that, you can actually go into the individual tracks now that you have them, and you can get rid of things like, I don't know, talking over each other, interruptions, clearing your throat. All of those things are really easy to pop out. You can even take any sections that are too quiet or where there's too long of a silence, and you can shorten that up to tighten up the timing. You can even make jokes land a little better by adding some space or shortening it up. There are a lot of options when editing those individual tracks that can make your podcast sound really, really tight.
Tetons.
And don't forget about mouth noises. Now, if you do any research, you'll find out that people complain about this a lot. The clicking of the tongue against the roof of the mouth, smacking of the lips, swallowing, breathing heavily. All of these things are pretty gross, especially if you're listening to something with a nice set of headphones on. So you can go into a podcast with separate tracks and take these things out, and it makes your podcast sound a lot more professional, and it doesn't make anybody want to throw up. So that's a huge bonus.
Or one
That's
image.
great. No, it's not great. That's rude. It's like, come on, man.
And speaking of bonus, there's one big problem that I struggled with a lot when editing this podcast remotely, and that's levels. People will tell you that one of the reasons they don't like the audio in a podcast is if one host is too loud, one's too quiet, and there's an inconsistent volume level between the people speaking on the show. Now, that's a real pain in the butt to get used to fixing manually because everybody speaks at different volumes. Now, Adobe Audition has a really slick solution for this. It's called the Match Loudness tool. So all you have to do is take your edited tracks, drag them into the Match Loudness tool, and it matches the volume. You can put in as many as you want, and it's couldn't be easier. So I would recommend looking at Audition and download a trial and check it out if you're not familiar with it. And that way you can see how this works. But it really helps polish the podcast by making sure that everybody talking is talking at the same volume.
It's going to be like going from a donkey to a rocket ship.
Now at this point, I'm going to play a little section of our podcast so that you can listen to it and tell me what it sounds like. And you might want to put on headphones for this part. You will notice that there's parts where we overlap. There's parts where you hear responses. There's going to be really good timing. And that's all because of the editing that I'm able to do by recording our audio tracks separately. Check this out.
I know how to spell Schwarzenegger. Hate that guy.
Spell Schwarzenegger.
Well, I don't have to do it here on the show.
Okay, you don't want to
Just take
show
my word
off.
for it that that's my superpower.
Okay, it's a given.
If I had to write it, I could do it.
Okay.
As long as Google was in there helping me out a little bit.
Right. I bet you Siri knows how to spell.
Schwarzenegger.
Okay, Google.
Yeah.
How do you spell Schwarzenegger?
So hopefully some of that was helpful to you, and it'll give you some good ideas to maybe get your podcast going or improve the one that you're already doing. I know that I am still learning, but as I do, I'm going to share it here with you on my channel. So make sure that you like and subscribe and hit the notification bell, and I appreciate you watching. See you next time.